Hey, everybody, it's Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show with our episode today. This really means a lot to me. We've got Doc Springer on. Doc Springer is someone who's working to crack the code on PTSD and suicide. We get really serious into this. You know, we talk about the VA, and the VA is great in so many ways, but in so many ways, we got a long way to go. And so what Doc Springer has done is she's sort of studied the entire process of PTSD and how we keep veterans alive. And if that's at all part of what you care about, I think you'll find this show to be fantastic. You guys definitely, Shauna Springer, that's her name, Shauna, not just Doc, but Doc Springer is someone who gets, she understands, she's talked to us enough, and she's taken a step back to understand sort of where the work is to be done. And I can't stress to you how important this is, because too often it's like military guys will just say, dig deeper, keep digging deep. And we got to do better than that. And Doc Springer helps us do that. There's a lot of things that trip us up in life. Now think about it. If you're already as a group prone towards suicide and self-destruction, now take those things that trip you up and not get, oh my gosh, it just gets to be bad. I don't want to talk about any more bad stuff. There's plenty of real serious conversation here. I think you guys will love it. By the way, this is appropriate because Scott and I are about to head out for the Ride for the Brave. This year is the second annual. We invented this thing last year. By we, I mean Scott. And we went out on the road, drove cross country, and we thought, well, this was so great. We got to meet all these wonderful people, and we saw so much support and outpouring of love for veterans. We thought we'd go out and do it again this year. So we've got an RV and we're headed east, and all the way, forget this, from San Marcos, California to Temecula. No, to Miami, not Temecula, Miami, San Marcos to Miami, all the way across the nation. And if you want to support us, hit me at peterbreakitdownshow.com. Go to Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Whatever it is, and that's how you can support us. That's it. I'll keep it short. No big ask from me today. Just support Save the Brave. That's where I want your attention and your efforts. Share those episodes, share those posts that we put out for Save the Brave, and help us to help veterans want to stay alive. Pretty good, right? That's what Doc Springer does. Here she comes.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Doc Springer, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, Doc Springer comes to us via Scott Husing, who, you know, he gets so busy, he can hardly even keep up with his own schedule, let alone all the crap that I put him through to be on the show. I miss Scott, and I wish he was here with us, but he's doing important things. And I wanted to mention this because part of what Scott and I do, he is the, I guess he's the president of Save the Brave. And he and I have done a lot of work with Save the Brave, with Nick and Lalo and all those guys to try to help deal with PTSD. I have PTSD. And just for your purposes, I have, the audience needs to hold on a second, calm down. I have suicidal ideation every day. I know it's coming. It's like a migraine for me. I dread the arrival, and then it comes, and then I deal with it and I move on. You know, It's not ideal. Maybe one day it will go away, but it doesn't seem to want to, you know, and that's why I'm working on patterns and all these kinds of things. I say all this because I've learned to not fear that. I learned that it's okay for me to say it, because the next peer behind me who maybe doesn't as capable yet, because I was not capable at all of dealing with it before. I want them to know that, like, hey, you can get here to where I'm at. You know, it's not awesome. It hurts. It sucks, but it's completely tolerable. And for me, thus far, very manageable.
Well, that's the key, isn't it, Pete? It's just the things that you don't talk about are the ones that can come around and bite you in the back. So I'll tell you what, I have never spoken to a combat warfighter who trusts me, who has ever said anything but, you know what, sometimes I have those thoughts. And so I really have come to the understanding that when somebody says, oh, I've never had a thought like that, then maybe they just don't trust me enough to tell me yet.
I want to take some of that off of you too, because I don't know what I'm supposed to say to protect myself, right? And I mean that in terms of the VA, my work, you know, my overall self. You know, like there's the rumor that if you admit to suicidal ideation, they'll take your guns away. We don't like that. I'd rather have my guns.
Yeah.
You know, And so there's an honesty problem where I don't know what's okay to say and what's going to harm me and what's really going to be in my file and then what's going to get out. I definitely, I have, and I continue to worry about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that because, there's a chapter in my book, Warrior, about the conversation about firearms and why it's such a loaded conversation because of what you just said. I spent 8 years working in a VA, and our power to remove firearms was much more limited. My desire to remove anyone's firearms was pretty much non-existent. And so my reasons for asking were always grounded in, I really want to keep your family from having the collateral damage and help you work through this valley so that we don't lose another irreplaceable warrior. But yeah, there's a lot of fear around that. And here's the thing. This is why I can't give you like a blanket statement, because it's an interaction between the providers training and their level of anxiety and what is shared. So I can tell you, Pete, for 8 years, I was in the VA, and I put 2 people into a facility, a psychiatric facility, in 8 years because of suicidal ideation. The first one asked me to. So he said, I don't think I can keep myself safe. And I think I want to go into this facility. And so he went into the facility because he was a voluntary admission. He was able to check himself out, which he actually did, which is interesting, within 24 hours. So that's how that one played out. The other one, I don't regret putting him in there because he was experiencing a psychotic episode. And here, I mean, loss of touch with reality. So I didn't think he could keep himself safe because he was not in touch with reality. And I moved to save my patient's life. So I have no regrets about that. But in 8 years, 2 people, it's just not something that a lot of us, especially myself, would reflexively do. So we're going to take your civil rights away, take your firearms away. It's just not my stance. I want to build the trust and hold the trust, but I can't speak on behalf of some people who might become very fearful and not understand, hey, that's common to have thoughts of self-destructing. It's common. It's part of the human universal experience. And so if one person is overreactive, it breaks the trust. And that's why it's about gaining that trust and holding that trust with our patients and providers.
If you're just checking in, Doc Springer is are you a psychologist or psychiatrist?
Psychologist, yeah. I don't prescribe medication.
And she deals with warriors who have PTSD, and you can see the link to her book, Warrior. You can get it on Amazon at the link in there. If you're listening on the podcast side, it'll be in the show notes. And one of the reasons why I have her on is, well, first off, Scott was raving, and we're all trying to sort this out. It's tough. I mean, look, in general, the VA, let me just say this. The VA is a lot better than it used to be, and there are wonderful people that work there. It is a very hard, complex system that even within it, it's hard to navigate. And it makes me want to kill myself sometimes, literally, because I'm like, I have to calm down. I can do this. There's an advocate here somewhere. I have worked to get to this point. And that's how hard the VA is to deal with, Yeah. And they're trying. You guys were all trying every day, trying to help us. And it's just...
Yeah, thank you for that, Pete, because I'll tell you, it is, it's so demoralizing when you are a mission-driven individual to have to start from a deep deficit of trust because of a reputation of an institution that actually is full of mission-driven people. So many of my colleagues were wonderful and there for the same reasons I was. And, I had my last 2 clinic managers. One of them is in the Army National Guard, and he would deploy from time to time. And he was he's still there, all about giving the best standard of care for patients. So it's probably a little bit similar to how, maybe one person screws up in your unit and then everybody is like smoked. Well, the smoking never stops. When there's a media story about, some clinician did something really irresponsible, then everybody pays for a really long time. And it leads us to have to start from this deficit of trust rather than people coming in and saying, who am I dealing with here? Let's see if we can build some trust.
And it's not just you. Like, so I trust my mental health care provider. I have a psychiatrist and a psychologist currently, and we work very hard on what I need to do.
Yeah.
They start with, like, at one point I had because they were this was so, it can be chaotic. I was using a local resource. I was using the big VA resource. And then, of course, I had my overseeing psychiatrist, right? And my psychiatrist was working on the last bits of her education. So she wasn't full solo practitioner. And so she had to move from time to time to finish completing up her hours. So a budget change killed my local asset. My main psychiatrist changed. My main therapist changed. Then those guys both changed. One of them didn't work out, and I was like, "This doesn't work," Yeah. And then I got this other guy, and he's like, "You have PTSD. You have insomnia. You are refusing to take drugs." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't have insomnia. I sleep too much. Depression is more of my problem in this case." And he hadn't even read my file. And so
if I had $1 for every veteran who said, I really don't want to start over with somebody new, right? That is like one of the most common. That's actually the reason I was at the VA for 8 years to the day. I decided that was going to be my way to serve. And I was going to serve for an enlistment, the length of an enlistment, in theory. Right. And then I sort of like went in for another 4 years, and I started on my birthday and I ended on my birthday exactly 8 years later. And then I ended up staying on mission and really continuing to support warriors because they, at that point, felt like home to me. But you're absolutely right. That trust, once you have it with somebody who's a good doc that you trust, it's worth so much. And sometimes you have to persist to find the right person or cobble your care together through community-based care and the VA and other, resources that you have. But it's very costly, as you know, to lose your provider, and it happens very often.
Yeah, I was cut loose, and it was tough. And I want to talk to the veterans out there and the other audience members who care about a veteran out there and trying to understand how this works. We get angry, we get lost in the system. I went and I had a second hernia operation. And so I was in for my follow-up post the second operation. This is my first follow-up since that, everything's going fine. I sit down, and the VA in Long Beach is a teaching hospital, so there's interns there, or whatever you call them, doctors who aren't fully licensed and everything. Uh-huh. He sits down with me for my post-op and says, I'm going to say this again, post-op. It says, "First time at the VA?" And I was like, and he wasn't funny. He wasn't like dry. No. He didn't know. And I said, "No, I'm here for a post-op. What does it say in my file?" And so these things all erode our trust in all of you, because I don't know that my best interests are at heart because of the system, because of the demand on the system. And again, this is not in any way to denigrate the great people there. I'm sure that doctor hopefully learned a good lesson that day. Yeah. But this is when we all hear these stories, and as loved ones, when you have your veteran and they're frustrated, what the heck do you do? How do they help that veteran get through it?
Yeah, it's not that much better in the private sector, for what it's worth.
True.
In terms of people, reading your file and making you feel like they really are giving you kind of a continuity of care. We do get a lot of the same dilemmas in the private sector, but there's not this there's not the same cultural and relational gap in trust as often happens in the VA. So it kind of lands a little bit differently. It's absolutely a problem when you come in for something and it doesn't give you any confidence that somebody is actually looking at you as a person rather than just their next appointment. And when, as you said, when systems get overtaxed, then people don't have the time that they need. And so there is kind of this sense of, if you have a good heart and you're trying to do your best, it can create issues that aren't really about the provider's character. I know that I had to manage hundreds of patients when I was in the VA as a psychologist, hundreds of patients. And so I had to get really creative about how I would help myself remember, because a lot of times, like veterans, like to you, it's like you're their only doc, right? So they kind of expect if they saw you a month ago, you're going to remember their wife's name. You're going to remember their best friend's name. You're going to remember the service dog that was so cute that they walked in with, and that service dog's name, if they have one, right? So I would have to like make little notes for myself and put dates in my computer. Like if somebody had an anniversary of trauma, I would have to set a clinical reminder to remind myself to call them, because it was a hard time of the year for them. But without those kinds of memory aids, there's no way that one could track all of the individuals that we were seeing in the very busy clinic where I worked.
I definitely want to spend some time here, because this is, we have this sense that, Pete went down a road one day and a bomb went off and his buddy Johnny died in his arms. And yes, that possibly happens to some people. But it's also these little things, these little nicks and bruises that we pick up where I don't even want to go to the VA. For example, Long Beach is not far. It's, let's call it 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, because the VA parking lot is impossible, right? So 40 minutes there, I get taken care of, I walk out, and then, depending on day, it's LA, so, 40 minutes back.
Yeah.
When the doctor says to me, just come here for your group session, on Tuesday at 10. And I'm like, why don't you do your group where I live at Tuesday at 10? Well, I couldn't do that. That's too far. Like, yeah. Like, let's find a solution. And it's funny because you're incented, I guess, in some way to make me go to the big VA. And then I find out that there's this whole massive clinic, like a big clinic, like 10 minutes from my house, in addition to my local small clinic. And I'm like, it's just so infuriating that these resources, and I'm lucky in Southern California, there's a lot of resources, but it's infuriating to be told like, hey, just go do this to manage my care. Yeah, I also have to manage my life, and I can't spend 3 hours of my day going to a group therapy once a week. I mean, it's not tenable. And then another thing I want to add on top of all of this stuff is, as we try to navigate this, my psychologist who, I talk to, we've pushed it out to about every 3 weeks now. That's where we're at. She helps me manage my care, and so I'll say, I'm so frustrated by this part of the VA. And she'll say, here's your resources. Let me look into this other doctor's file. Okay. Like I was trying to see the dermatologist, right? Shauna, this has nothing to do with PTSD. I'm trying to see.
I know. I played that role so often. Yeah. It's like you become the de facto like patient advocate for your patients, like because they trust you and you pick up your phone and they know that you'll remember who they are. They call you and they get help that way in navigating the system. So what I started doing was, it was, before the VA really started rolling this out as a national movement, there was an awesome peer support specialist that I work with, and he and I teamed up and we created something called the New Patient Briefing Group. And so rather than people feeling like this is a new system, I feel like a number, and reacting like humans do to that, right? This is a complex maze. We had a group that said, here are all the key people, and here are all the things that you might not know about that you're eligible for. And by the way, let's have the vet center people come in and tell you about their services and kind of break down that sense of like the VA is different from the vet center. We just wanted people to get help where they could find that trusted connection, right? So we had a really good partnership, and my clinic manager, who was awesome and still there, supported all of that. So let's collaborate with the vet center. And, I'm going to sound like I'm rah-rah for the VA, but I actually did work at a really good VA with really good colleagues. And so like that definitely shaped my experience. And I was one of the first people to do the telehealth support for veterans. I used to do once a month, I did a seminar about how to avoid marrying a total jerk, or, how to get over infidelity, like what it takes to heal from infidelity, or how do you manage jealousy. There was like a different relationship topic, and I had monthly seminars that I would send out to telehealth to different systems. And I know that other people in my VA were starting the telehealth therapy appointments as well. And so the beauty of telehealth is that it can fit right into your life. You can sit in your car during lunch, have a sandwich, and like slot that care right in. So they're improving, but every VA is different. Every system is different. I had patients I got from one system that were, so angry about the care they had received, and others who were fearful of never getting the same standard of care again. And for what it's worth, when I came in, I was following a good doc who built trust with all of the patients I served. And people were so angry at me from get-go just because I wasn't him. So I had to overcome all of that, the loss of that attachment, of that trust with their former doc. And that was hard. I write about that in my book, how painful that was, how ashamed I felt when somebody said, "Are you like 25? You've never been to war. What makes you think you can even understand somebody like me?" And I thought, what if he's right? And then it really has been 10 years of trying to evolve my approach to practice so that I can build and hold that trust with the people I'm serving.
I'm spending time on these non-PTSD issues just to reveal how challenging it is to get care, because it really is. It takes a lot of patience. All of these things are normal things in the singular, okay, you have to go to the patient advocate or whatever it is. But when it jumps on top of you and you're already struggling with these kinds of day-to-day things, it's just I don't need more problems. I go to my therapy session, I want to ask you, and again, I'm illustrating partly for the people that have someone that they love and how challenging this can be, and then how they can insert themselves into the process by, saying, hey, these people across the board do want to help, but look how many things you're doing that have nothing to do specifically with, sit down on my couch, and talk. Like all of these external things, taking notes for hours on patients, that's not what you signed up to go to school for, but it's what you have to do to maintain our trust and be reliably able to get us down this path.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you have to make trade-offs. So one of the things that my patients teased me about a little bit, which I don't regret because I had a good reason. I'll tell you what the alternative would have been. I set an egg timer during our sessions, and they knew once that egg timer went off, that was going to be 5 minutes from the end of our time. And so I was going to, wrap it up with them when that egg timer went off. Now, the reason I did that was because, A, I don't want to be looking at the clock when I'm with someone. I want to be with my patient, looking at them, talking to them, creating and holding that trust, building that human connection. So that was my reason. The second reason was I needed a little bit of built-in time to write my notes. And if I didn't build that time in, then I would have been running behind, which would have been disrespectful to the people waiting on me. So being on time was something that I was really a priority to me, because that was a show of respect, and a way to build trust is in those kinds of intentional choices for me. So you show up on time, right? But the alternative would have been, I suppose, some providers would write their note during the session. And as a result, they would kind of be at their computer rather than sitting with the patient. And I didn't want to do that. That was not how I wanted to practice. So that was the trade-off, is to, I know this might seem a little bit like cold, but I'm going to set a timer, but I'm going to tell you why. It's because I don't want to look at the clock, and I want to make sure I keep myself on time, because I want to respect your time as well. But it was tricky to navigate that stuff.
One of the things that also gets my goat is, as you do intake, it's so important for the machine to do intake with you. And then it's nothing. Tell us about the worst moments of your life. Which moment was that? And I'm like, motherfucker, it's more than 20. I'm not breaking those wounds open for you. Fuck you. If you want to help me,
Yeah.
then let's start somewhere else. But let's not start with all of these things and to start bashing them with a hammer, like.
Yeah.
But
Sounds like you've read my book. This sounds like you've maybe read Warrior, or the first few chapters. I really talk about that. How, the first, like the highest order calling of any healer is to build the trust that helps you understand the pain of the people you serve. And so I kind of look back and I laugh at myself, right, during the first year or two of my job, when I thought I was getting the truth during an intake. And then as I evolved my approach to practice, right, now in retrospect, after I figured it out pretty quickly that, that's the test of trust, right? They're testing me to see, can I trust you to hear the things that are really eating me alive right now? And so many times, I would months later have someone say, those first few months we were meeting, I had I was suicidal every night, actively suicidal, drinking, and had a, loaded firearm in my mouth a few times. I never told you about that because I didn't trust you yet. Yeah. And so 100%, I think sometimes in medicine, we run really fast in one direction because we think, we're going to get all this information and then we're going to make a good treatment plan. And we've forgotten, wait a minute, what if they don't trust you? Then all the information you get is going to make you be off target by a nautical mile. So maybe we need to think this through a little bit differently and really build that trust. And so a lot of my writing is about how healers need to change their approach and remember that your treatment plan is only as good as the trust that you hold with your patients.
Professionally, for me, building trust is an important thing. When I was a spy, I had to survive on trust, because you can't just survive on force doing my kind of work. It's relationship driven. It's a lot like what you guys are doing. A lot of times I am a psychologist for them. Just listening to them download stuff, and that makes them talk and it gets them going in a direction. And now I'm doing it. So I get all these things. And keep in mind, this one intake that I'm talking about, these two people weren't even going to provide care for me.
Yeah.
It was just like a practice session, for them. So you're right. This trust thing is vital. I know for the first, dozen or so sessions with my current therapist, I would worry about how I was sitting because I'm a mindful person of body language. And I'm like, my back is killing me. And so I'm wiggling around because my back hurts. And I would have to say, I'm wiggling around because my back is killing me, or though I'm depressed today and just wearing sweats, I'm freezing, and so I'm going to be bald. But it's all this stuff that I had to worry about before I could fully relax and trust my therapist.
Well, you were building the trust, though, by saying those things and seeing how they handled it. So the process of building trust, right, is you take a small risk, you share what's inside, and see how the person handles it. And that's a process, right? So it's interesting because I meet with so many, combat warfighters who say, I don't have to even say it out loud to my buddies. I can just, they know what I'm feeling, and I can just with my nonverbals, or they just get it. And to me, it's because you've spent years walking through the trenches of situations that required you to communicate verbally and nonverbally, explicitly about who you are, what your intentions are, to communicate by showing them who you are when the chips are down, who you are when there's a challenge. Trust is theoretical until the first firefight. It's right. Yeah. It's totally theoretical. So sometimes in therapy, you can actually build more trust by a slight rupture in trust and then a repair than if you've never had that conflict. So one of the big things I teach people, couples and otherwise, is that we have to have conflict. Conflict teaches us about who we are, who our partner or our therapist is. And if we can navigate that together in a way that's mutually respectful, that's how we grow the trust.
Yeah, when I think about trust, I think about like a credit account. When you take low risk trust and you extend that to somebody who has no trust bank, that would be me sitting across from you in the chair. I'm going to extend this trust to you. I'm going to extend this trust to you. And then you don't assume that you have trust. You have to test it. You're saying rupture and repair. I'm saying, look for things and ever increasingly things until you're talking about life and death trust in my line of work, which you don't have to do, but in kind of a way you do.
I do actually, though. Yeah. It's life and death stakes. this kind of trust that I want to hold with people sometimes matters at that level.
Yeah. How do you know when you have it? Like, okay, so you have a person you haven't really had to rupture trust, and it's from all appearances, and this is a thing I have to deal with. There is no problem with trust, but I didn't have it, and I've seen it when it locks in, and I'm like, oh, now I have it. Now this person's saying my words out loud to his peers in Afghanistan or whatever it is. We have really broken through here, and these were these secondary things, right? But you don't get to see me out of the chair, to validate that. How do you validate trust?
Oh, but you feel it.
Okay.
Pete, you feel it at a cellular level when you're synced up with someone and they're with you and they're making direct eye contact with you and they're not trying to shade themselves from you seeing what's really going on. And the kinds of stories they start to share are the kinds of stories that I call in my work the fox in their gut. So I don't know if you've read Warrior as yet.
I've thumbed through it. I've not read the whole thing yet. No.
So the kind of concept that I start with is the concept of the boy of Sparta who had a fox in his gut that ate him alive in plain view, but he didn't say a word about it because, the Spartans prized stoicism. And so with so many of the warriors that I've treated, as you've said, there's often a test of trust, but you conceal really what the real pain is, what the root of the issue is. Often it's intertwined with things like guilt or shame or moral injuries, survivor guilt, grief, those kinds of things that we lock away and we don't talk about. When people start to look at me directly and openly share from a vulnerable and authentic place, I can tell. You can feel it when they're not defended anymore. And it's such an honor to be in that space. To me, it feels like we're walking on sacred ground. And that's a place that I hope to get to with I'm not really doing clinical work right now, but from years of developing that and then being invited into their private circles and even, being called doc by them, that is all about the trust that we hold with each other because it's a two-way street.
It's for those who are listening who aren't military, it's a sign of respect to be called doc. It means you are looking out for us and our well-being. And the fact that that's sort of your moniker now, it told me something because it's not DR, it's doc. And so I'm like, she probably gets it. I'm going to extend some trust and benefit of the doubt. And then, and obviously Scott introduced you to me. So, but that Doc Springer is different than, Dr. Springer. Or whatever it is. Yeah. And, to me, there's, that's the greatest honor of kind of my journey is to come into that. But I'm not satisfied that I'm where I need to be. Like every warrior, not that I'm a warrior in the conventional sense, but my definition of warriorhood is when you're willing to take risks and be uncomfortable and be disciplined about fighting for the people and things you value. So by that definition, right, like any warrior, it's a continual crucible, a continual evolution of growth. I'm still figuring it out, but there is a level of trust there that helps me figure it out faster than I did at first. And every time someone trusts me and teaches me something or trains me up on something or shares what's deeply locked in the vault for them, then I will get better and better at understanding how we can best support our warfighter community and first responders too. I love it. So you've talked to a lot of veterans. I probably have as much time outside of the wire as anyone you've ever talked to. And I have a basic code. There's things that trip my not a pro. And it's okay to not be a pro. Just know to shut up and learn from the pros around you, right? So if you're not a pro, shut up and learn. Those are my basic things. And you see that in the behavior of people. Let me see if I want to say this. A lot of people don't leave the camp and are still damaged. I'm not in any way minimizing that, right? And then there are people like me that leave all the time and for all intents and purposes, don't seem to have damage. Like I know a lot of guys. I'm like, how are you so cool with all of this? How do you sort out the kind of damage they take? Or is it all the same? I don't know. I mean, I've seen people die. I've been shot at, all those things. I don't think that those things are the things that have ultimately damaged me the most, though.
No, It's not all the same.
Okay.
And we have a great misconception that the things people see and do in war is the major cause of trauma for our military community. That's not what I observed. The cause of trauma for so many of my patients that I held trust with was different. It was, childhood injuries. It was the trauma of losing brothers and sisters who are family to you, to suicide, to training accidents. It was survivor guilt from just surviving when someone you love like family dies. It was moral injuries. And sometimes, moral injuries are thought to mean you committed an atrocity of war. That's not how I think of the term. I think of it as something that creates a rift in your sort of moral code, your warrior code. And just surviving when someone you love dies shifts the entire moral framework of your life after that point. So I'll give you an example, Pete. So in the combat theater, it's not the horror of the death that's often the biggest trauma, because warriors get trained and they're warriors. There's often that can be the trauma, but it's not always the trauma that we assume it is. Really, it's often that in transition, sometimes maybe somebody will struggle, like many do, go through a period of heavy drinking, or they yell at their spouse or their kids, and they see a look on their kid's face that reminds them of a look of a kid they saw in Iraq or Afghanistan, and it violates their warrior code because they don't prey on the innocent, right? And so getting that memory and feeling like I'm the problem, I'm the one that needs to go, is a unique vulnerability for people that are wired like warriors. They have unique vulnerabilities. And so they will often compare themselves to the ghost of the person they lost. And they will say, that person would never have had this problem, would never be drinking, would be able to hold down a job, would not be yelling at their kids. Who am I that was worthy to live when somebody more worthy than me died? And that is how these kinds of feelings metastasize into a dangerous form of kind of metaphorical cancer that can be all-consuming over time. And that's not about the horrors of what you see and do in war in the sort of like traditionally understood sense of it.
I want to get right back to this, but I don't want to lose this thought because it pertains to what we were talking about 2 minutes ago, and it's going to feed in even more into what this is. So when I talk about people who are pros, you're talking about discipline. You're talking about being a warrior. A lot of that stuff happens off camera. What does Dr. Springer do off camera to hold herself accountable to what I demand of you as a warrior? What does that look like?
I'll tell you, I'll answer that by telling you the book I'm reading right now, which is, I really recommend it, it's actually Jason Kander's book, Outside the Wire. Now, it's not a book about being outside the wire a lot in the sense of like in the combat theater. It's about moral courage and his stories of how moral courage is required to advance anything in politics. It's a really funny book. Like, I really want to meet him at some point. But he talks about spotlight rangers, who are the people that, get it together and act like they're really working hard when people are watching, but they don't when people are not watching. So to answer your question, based on the kind of concept of Jason Kander and the spotlight ranger and what moral courage is, to me, it's about being a person of integrity and not, when you're off camera, kind of having a whole different personality and set of values. And for me, as a doc, one of the most helpful things in helping me get there was the work I did outside of the narrow kind of patient-provider role, which creates a system of rank where I say, not intentionally, but just the system sets me up to come into that room and say, I outrank you. And I'm not interested in that relationship with the people I serve. I'm interested in serving them as a doc without regard to rank or positional authority. So going on deployments with organizations like Team Rubicon and responding when we had fires and floods here in California, working with veterans, coming into a collective tribe with them, sometimes taking orders from them because I didn't outrank them. I didn't have the skills they had with that mission, right? And seeing this kind of beautiful camaraderie, but feeling like part of it actually really helped me to shift off of just that doctor-patient role. And so I think people, like veterans, can tell very quickly if you're a doctor or a doc. And it's really about how you approach your service role and the kinds of choices you make to continue to evolve in your understanding of the people that you support.
I'm glad you said this, and this is all really great. This is a really powerful section of the show, this whole last 15 minutes. Another thing is a lot of VA docs are veterans.
Yeah.
But they're not the kind of veteran I am. And so there is a rank ordering, yeah, okay, great, you're cute. You were in the Air Force, you went to Qatar, and you always had metal silverware. I ate goat every day, with my hands. So, and it's not to rank order, but when they say I'm a veteran and then move beyond it, yeah, you're a veteran, but how in the world we are not in any way alike, because and again, not knocking the Air Force, not knocking Coast Guard, not knocking anybody, but it's not the same thing. It's not good enough to say I'm a veteran as you build trust. You haven't satisfied that requirement yet, right? So how would you tell your peers, hey, when you say that, what's next? Because you haven't finished the task.
Yeah, it's always funny to me when people say, well, we just got to hire more veterans to be healers. Yes. And exactly what you said is true. The between group comparisons are endless.
Right.
And there's still a process of building trust, because even if you served, yes, you have a leg up. Even if you served in a similar role, you have a bigger leg up, but you still might have disconnect or 10 in terms of trust. And in fact, there's a danger that if your experiences are similar, you're actually more likely to import your own understandings into someone else's story, which is not helpful. So I think the flip side of people saying, how could you understand what I've been through? I don't fight them on that. I haven't been through what you've been through. I wouldn't want to say that I have, but I also don't bring in a set of assumptions that I get it. Oh yeah, I get it. You don't even have to tell me that story because I've already been there, right? And I've already lived through that. That doesn't happen with people when they come to this work with a heart that seeks to understand and listen eloquently.
When I'm sitting there in my chair and I'm talking to my doctor and we're working on things, I don't know what the hell she's doing. I don't know what lever she's pulling. And as a lever puller, right, as a spy, I'm like, what is she trying to accomplish here? And so I have to try to get out of that part of my head and just kind of go with wherever she's taking me. And so I just flap my jibs and I just talk. And I'm like, I don't know when she wants me to shut up. I'm just going to keep talking. And so I sort of just kind of throw these ingredients into the soup. And so one of the things, and this is going back to talking about how the damage doesn't have to be Johnny dying in your arms. There are two incidents that have happened that I realize now have caused me a considerable amount of distress and likely exacerbated my PTSD. And I'm not even including the early childhood stuff. But one of them was very early in my deployment to Bosnia. I got dropped off by a helicopter about 1.5 miles outside of my camp. And then I had to walk by myself, across the land that had 55 million mines or whatever the number was they told me. And I was surrounded by kids and I had no radio and I lit it so it's like every step was I going to step on a mine? Was someone going to shoot? Because we didn't know at that time. Turned out it was not nearly as dangerous. I didn't know that. And then as I approached the camp, I realized, oh shit, now I have to prove to them that I'm a safe person, because they don't know. They're not expecting me. I live on this camp, but I'm camouflaged, and it wasn't terrifying, but it was extremely stressful. And I had to decide, do I kill all of these kids if it comes down to it? What am I going to do to survive the situation? And all of these thoughts went through my head. I just kind of sat there for a long time until I went, holy cow, that had to have hurt me. But I hadn't even considered it until I started doing this therapy.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I just watched Lone Survivor the other night, and have you seen that movie, Pete?
I have seen it,
or read the book. I'll read the book next, but somebody said, "Oh, you gotta know about this story." And I'm like, "What? Where have I been?" So I just watched the movie first, and then I'll read the book next. But there was a dilemma where they had to make a similar decision. What do I do? And they had this kind of morally anguishing dilemma that they had to figure out. And that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a bigger understanding of moral injury. You didn't do anything to create that scenario for yourself. A situation like that can conspire to create a split in your warrior code just because you happen to be in that scenario that day. And being in a scenario like this is another misconception, right? That you have to be outside the wire to have trauma. I once did like a group with combat veterans and got a little resistance from some of them, because this is a group for Vietnam veterans. And some of them were, of the mind that no, they had been out there doing patrols in the jungle, and they didn't want anybody in that group that didn't. They didn't want anybody in that group that was on like a base. But I went against them on that one. And what happened was they came to understand that when the gentleman spoke up about his experience, he was loading munitions on aircraft with no weapon to defend himself and incoming mortars. So that's not a protected position.
And it's not.
Right? So they had a whole new realization of, so let's not draw clean distinctions between safe and unsafe in a war zone. And they were really not only like folded him in, but all of them walked out of that group with more humility about the fact that sometimes when you don't have a weapon to defend yourself with, and you just have to keep carrying on, and you feel, you feel like a sitting duck taking incoming, that's a trauma. And it will cause a biological injury that we now know is not an invisible injury. If you have the right brain scan, you can see it on a brain scan, and it's treatable. And some of the work that I do with the Stella Center is a precision medicine approach, usually used in special forces units, but I learned about it and started working with MDs who provide it when I was at the VA. And it's an injection in a cluster of nerves of an anesthetic that treats that biological injury, that calms you down and resets your adrenaline system to a state of calm. That's the kind of thing that we need to be having more conversations about around the kind of trauma you just described, where every step was, is this going to be my last step? Or what about this one? That does something to you biologically. So PTS is not, it's not a disorder, it's an injury. It's not an invisible injury. It's visible and it's treatable. And we need to start having different conversations around how to address that.
Yeah. Yeah. My daily mission was to go out, right? And I learned early on, I didn't process it all the way, but I learned early on that, again, I had to get by on something other than force because we could easily be outnumbered. There were 4 of us, 5 of us tops. And half of us had pistols. And so it wouldn't be hard to just hijack us, with loaded guns and just be like, everybody stop. We were exposed all the time. So we had to use, other skills to do it. But that didn't mean that we weren't constantly scanning and the other thing, scan. What's in trouble? What's going to kill you? What's different? And how about being hunted by a sniper, and you're doing a lazy W as you talk to someone, right? And so you're for the audio audience, I'm moving my shoulders around in a pattern so that I'm harder to kill by a sniper.
Right. It's like the warfighter's variant of what maybe mothers do long after they have babies. I would rock my baby so many times that long after she was like, a kid, I'd find myself just standing there, because it was ingrained in my muscle memory. Now, for you, it's different, of course. Different cause, different reason. But this isn't a diagnosis. But what I refer to that state as in my work is chronic threat response.
Right.
It's chronic threat response caused by a biological injury to your system that tells you have to be wired tight and constantly head on a swivel looking for the threat. So everything in your life now becomes filtered through threat. And there's something like a medical doctor said the other day to me, there's a word for that. When you talk about being in tunnel vision, It's called foveal vision, from the fovea in your eye. It's not being able to see, but what's in front of you, right? And so you kind of like, I think about like the Terminator, like when he gets his computer printout, right? It's like, not a threat, he's like, that's your mental ticker tape as you scan people and environments, and it's exhausting. And so the people that I have worked with, a lot of Marines, not always Marines, but a lot of Marines, some guys from the Army, some women from, warriors, have gotten this injection. It's fascinating because they don't know each other, but they say very similar things afterwards. And one of the most common things they will say right there in the operating room, because I've been right there in the operating room with so many of them, is the colors in the room look brighter, or I can see more clearly what's around me. And I think it's because when you address that biological injury and you get calm in your own body, your tunnel vision expands and you can see more of what's around you because you're not in a state of chronic threat response anymore.
Yeah. Let me illustrate that point with you because this is 100%. So when I came back, I'm like, I'm sick of the threat world, sick of it. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And so I started doing yoga with a bunch of middle-aged ladies. And it was hilarious. I would start laughing out loud during the practice because 3 weeks before I was on combat patrols, I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I paid for some private lessons because I wanted to better understand yoga because I was trying to outdo it, because I'm a warrior. That's what I do. And so she's got her hands on my shoulders and we're in a park and it's beautiful in Sacramento. She's rubbing my shoulders. She's like, I want you to relax. Do you see the rose garden off in the distance? Yes. I want you to put a soft focus on one of those roses. I'm like, I see it clear as day. Not a problem. She's like, that's laser focus, soft focus. And I'm like, I don't have that.
You didn't have that setting. You can't throttle down. It's like, this is how my patients describe it to me. They're like, I'm like a muscle car that's like revving at a constant state and I can't throttle back.
Right.
And so at that point, it's not a weakness. It's not a moral, failing. It's an injury. It's a biological injury that I am privileged to work with MDs to address, because guess what? When you address that biological injury and people get calm in their own bodies, it changes everything about what I can do with them. There's a lot of acceptance. Insights in a different way. There's a lot of
acceptance in this for us warriors too, because it kills me to have to put in paperwork for a VA disability claim. And yet I know I can cognate. My big dumb hard brain goes, but you hurt your hips in Bosnia. You did. Do you remember thinking to yourself out loud, that's going to be an injury 20 years? And it is, right? But I feel like shit when I have to do it. I have to tell my friends, like, I have to apologize for being this weak and asking for this help. Can you write me a letter? And I know, and I'll say to them, I know that this is no big deal, but I feel like shit asking for help in this thing because it proves that I'm soft,
That you're human.
Yeah. and not that I deserve this, but this is an appropriate thing to do to get this accommodation from the government to say, yes, we broke your body doing this in service.
It's so much harder for people to get to the place where they can do that with their mental health, with their mental warfare.
That's where I wanted to go.
It's like, I would like to flip that on its head for a second and say this, we generally, except for some warriors, can say my body is not superhuman. It's going to break down eventually, right? So we expect to have some health problems at some point, some wear and tear on the car, so to speak.
Right.
Yet we don't expect we'll ever have a challenge in terms of mental warfare or mental health, like that's the standard, that we're going to go through life and never walk that valley ever. That's ridiculous. And the height of arrogance to me that somebody needs to check, because if your body breaks down, your mind is also going to go through times of real struggle. And we just need to break that stigma and really normalize that, those thoughts are normal, but you don't have to get stuck there. There's a pathway out of that.
Yeah, I definitely have gotten stuck in the past quite a bit.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to say about this specifically is I often try to characterize this for people who don't have a chance to understand it or are unable to understand it about themselves. If you could see your wound on your shoulder or on your friend's shoulder, you would treat them differently. You would go, oh my God. Like if you could see divorce on your best friend's leg, you would say, That's gross. Get that to a hospital and get that taken care of, because divorce fucking hurts. It sucks. You're torn apart. You're telling me you're fine as you're limping along with half a leg, and PTSD and these kind of things are the same thing, where you think you're fine, but in reality, you've got a significant injury.
Which we can now see on a brain scan. That's going to be the best part, right? Because when people understand that, then it eliminates the stigma. Now it's not invisible. It's not a life sentence. It's not about your deficiency or your weakness. It's something that needs treatment. You need a little help with that, And so I think that's going to be one of the best innovations to come. My organization is in talks with some really leading research teams about doing some of the innovative PTSD treatments we're doing with brain scanning, so that we can show people, hey, we really need to evolve this term and think of it as PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, in line with the work of a couple of world-renowned doctors that I'm privileged to be connected to, a psychiatrist named Frank Ochberg, who's on our advisory committee, and Dr. Eugene Lipoff, who is a world-renowned anesthesiologist. They have both said it's an injury, and I'm with them. I have seen, what they've said, and it's an injury. So
yeah, it's hard to see. It's like Faraday searching for electric waves. He's like, there's a field around this thing, and you have to prove it somehow, some way. And I totally agree. Like, I've had to search for what that is. I wanted to go back again in time and talk about these injuries that don't happen because Johnny died in your arms. I was very good at my job. My buddy Rich and I were going all over Afghanistan, outside the camps, oftentimes with no other escort, because we had protected ourselves with culture. And so, though we're exposed to danger, we were very good at what we were doing, and we were confident that we weren't doing anything reckless. And this is in a dangerous, reckless place. So we understand there's a level of risk. And we broke down the code for education in the military and State Department and the Afghans and how to work it. And basically the answer is don't approach our kids with books. Don't approach the Ministry of Education with books. And we wrote all this stuff down. And a year later, a Department of State patrol got blown up delivering books to kids. And everybody had our report. This is not like a thing where we just didn't know. People who had physically read our report were still there in this spot. And both Rich and I took a significant hit because we had done all of this exceptionally dangerous work, high-level work that basically nobody else in that area could have accomplished. And then someone still died in spite of it. And not just one someone, like a group of someones, and people were badly maimed in this thing. And, I want to say it kills me, but I feel like that's, over dramatic, but it's also true. It kills me that this happened. And this happened, I wasn't 2,000 miles anywhere near. I wasn't anywhere near this when this happened, but my work directly could have saved these people. They may have died that day no matter what they did, but they should not have been dying. They should not have been on a patrol delivering books.
Yeah.
I am trying to figure out how to give myself some relief on that, but I cannot manage to put that weight down reliably. I can put it down, but I come back, I got to pick this back up again. And I hold it. Like right now, I'm feeling like heavy chested about it.
So maybe I can share something that can, I'm not going to say solve it, but help move you in the right direction. The reason why you feel such agony is first of all, because there's a code there that I worried about my patients a lot more when they weren't bothered by these things, right? Yeah. So a sociopath, that happens, no problem. It doesn't stay with them. Yeah. The reason you get so stuck there, Pete, is because it matters to you. And there is a moral dimension to the work that you did, and you're grappling with your sense of helplessness in the face of an outcome you wish you could have prevented. I've had patients that have I
thought I had prevented. Yeah. I really believed we had prevented this. We had fixed this part of the machine, Yep.
That you had put the report together, you had sent it to all the parties, and then you find out that the outcome you desperately wanted to avoid happened anyway. And so it's grappling, with your sense of helplessness, and also the sense of, if I let this go, does that mean that I don't care? So sometimes I had a lot of patients would hold on to pain or grief because it was intertwined with what was sacred to them. Right. So it's all tangled up together, like warriors that say, no, I don't want to grieve and move on, right, from somebody I lost. Now, I would say you're not really supposed to like forget about someone and move on. That's not really a definition of healthy grieving. It's about keeping the connection, actually. But a lot of people have that misperception. So they would lock their grief and this kind of pain deep in the vault because they don't want a psychologist to come in there and say, let's remove that burden from you, because it's intertwined with the stuff that's sacred. So if you can get clear on what is sacred to you and honor that thing, you might feel the burden less. It really is, related to Karl Marlantes' work around turning the ghosts that haunt you into ancestors. Echo, stop. I don't know what I have, but I probably have some meeting.
Yeah, and we're at 1:00, so we'll wrap this up.
But Karl writes a lot about this concept. And when I was at the VA, I tried to deploy his concepts in moral injury groups to help release people. Ultimately, it was also about the tribe, though, that what I could do as their doc was a part of what helped them to heal. But the tribe that they created that spoke to that pain became the moral authority that released my patients, not me. And some of the work that we did together, where they went out and they reclaimed their warrior code, like one of my patients went all over the country, met up with the families of the fallen. They went together to the cemetery and grieved them. The best work he did happened when I wasn't anywhere near him, not even in the same zip code.
Sure.
So, getting creative with it, but realizing that part of the reason you're probably stuck is because that helplessness and that pain is wrapped up with some pretty sacred stuff that you're not ready to let go of.
I can see that. Yesterday, two people I know died. It's my birthday yesterday, by the way. And so two people I know died. One was an old man who was in hospice, and so it wasn't a terrible shock. But the other one died of COVID, and he's basically my age. He's just in his early 50s. And the first impression that I got was this girl, and that got blown up. It's when people die, and I'm like, God, I just don't want to have to revisit this all the time. So, and you don't have to help me out right now, but I just want to point this out for people who have veterans in their lives. There's a lot of stuff we carry around that we may not even realize. A lot of my PTSD was realized when I came home, and all of a sudden to the workforce, I was obsolete. Oh, why don't you go guard something? I'm like, guard something? God damn it. I got a master's degree. I'm really good at working, but, all of these things are important. And I also really want to have you on and talk about the ethical damage that we take, slightly different than moral damage, because we reach these ethical saturations where ethics flip on their head and horrible things become normal things. And that's hard to deal with. But I know you are on a tight timeline, so thank you so much. Anything you want to say in closing? I had some struggles with the promotional aspect of getting my work out there, and talked to a Marine in my network, and he basically said, with love in my heart, build a bridge in your mind and get the F over it. So I'm going to, be bold and say that, a lot of the insights I've really gained from walking with warriors is in my book, Warrior, How to Support Those Who Protect Us. And my desire is to get that out as broadly as possible so that it can help warriors understand their own struggles. It can help their loved ones understand how to support them. And it can raise up a whole generation of docs that are willing to understand what their hidden pain is about and treat them where the need is at. So I'd love it if people would go to my website, DocShaunaSpringer.com, or just to Amazon or wherever you buy books and pick up a copy, read it, post a review, help me get it out there. I'm trying to learn to work through my discomfort and ask for the help I need so it can have the impact I had hoped. Same. Yeah, everybody look on the screen. You can see the Amazon link. I listen to things on Audible. I find that a great way to multitask in a healthy way. Definitely get Shauna's book, Warrior, on Amazon. And if you are not a warrior, get it for a warrior get it for someone before, so you can always say, I'm always working on trying to help warriors. Every time you say, thank you for your service, now think, what can I actually do? What can I actually do? I'm going to buy someone this book. I'm going to rate 5 stars and review it. Do these things because it will get the book out, and that will help us, because Shauna knows what she's talking about. Thank you so much, Shauna.
Thanks, Pete. It was fun. I'm happy to come back and continue the conversation another time.